So operant conditioning, he believed in the power of rewards to increase the likelihood of a behavior and punishments to decrease the occurrence of a behavior. There are two main processes involved in operant conditioning. They are the reinforcement and the punishment occurs. Reinforcement occurs when a response is strengthened by an outcome. There are two types of reinforcement, the negative and the positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement occurs when a behavior is strengthened by a positive reward. For example, a child behaves well at the shop so is given a chocolate as a reward. This reinforces the good behavior at the shop. Negative reinforcement occurs when behavior is strengthened by the removal of a negative stimulus. For example, doing a relaxation exercise when stressed. The relaxation exercise responses reinforces this behavior as the stress aversive stimulus has been removed. Punishment. When a response to behavior decreases the likelihood of the behavior reoccurring within 2007, there are also two types of punishment, the negative and the positive punishment. The positive punishment occurs when an aversive response to behavior is used and therefore the behavior is less likely to occur. For example, a child is given chores when he or she has been naughty. The child therefore has been given a punishment to reduce the likelihood of the bad behavior continuing. While the negative punishment occurs when something is taken away and therefore decreases the likelihood of the behavior reoccurring. For example, a person fails to secure a bike and this leads to the thief of the bike. This therefore decreases the likelihood of the person leaving property unsecured in the future. How operant conditioning works. Operant conditioning focuses on using either reinforcement or punishment to increase or decrease the behavior. Through this process, an association is formed between the behavior and the consequences for that behavior. For example, imagine that a trainer is trying to teach a dog to fetch a ball. When the dog successfully chases and picks up the ball, the dog receives praise as a reward. When the animal fails to retrieve the ball, the trainer withholds the praise. Eventually, the dog forms an association between his behavior of fetching the ball and receiving the desired reward. Now let's move on to the differences between classical and operant conditioning. In terms of behavior, involuntary or voluntary, classical conditioning involves associating between an involuntary response and a stimulus known as respondent behaviors which occur reflexively or automatically. Operant conditioning is about associating between a voluntary behavior and the consequences, known as operant behaviors, which is under our conscious control. Classical conditioning is passive on the part of the learner. Operant conditioning requires the learner to actively participate and perform some type of action in order to be rewarded or punished. Operant conditioning, the learner is rewarded with incentives. Classical conditioning involves no such impediments. So these are the classical conditioning counseling techniques. So we have here the systematic desensitization, aversive therapy, flooding or internal inhibition, counter conditioning. So those are under the classical counseling techniques. So now let's move on to the internal inhibition or flooding or implosion therapy. Flooding is a process generally used for those with phobias and anxiety. It works by exposing the patient directly to their worst fears. What flooding aims to do is expose the person to the phobic object or situation for an extended period of time in a safe and controlled environment. The idea is that the person cannot escape the object situation during the process and therefore must confront the fear head-on. The next one, this leads to fatigue and eventual unlearning of the undesirable response. The initial response would be high anxiety or panic, which would wear itself out after a while. Obviously, this method can be disconcerting and may only be suitable for certain situations. So, an example of this would be exposing a person who is afraid of a spider to a spider for an extended period of time. The longer this continues with nothing but happening, the less fearful the person becomes. Now let's move on to the systematic desensitization. Developed by Joseph Wolf, 1958 to 1969, from earlier work by Jacobson, 1938. A procedure used to eliminate anxiety and fear, example, caused by taking a test, or fear of an animal, or etc. This technique works on a similar premise to flooding, however, it is more gradual. The counselor will develop a hierarchy of scenes with increasing intensity related to the fear or phobia. The child is taught the process of deep muscle relaxation. While relaxed, the child is asked to visualize the scenes in the hierarchy. The child is asked to go as high as possible in the hierarchy without having anxiety. When anxiety is felt, the child signals the counselor by the raising one finger, and then counselor reverts to a less anxiety-provoking scene. The technique involves relax, imagine, relax, stop, imagining, relax, and so on. After repeating practice, the child learns to relax while visualizing each stage of the stimulus hierarchy.